Everyone needed something from him. His boss needed a response before end of day. His mother needed him to call more often. His friends needed his opinion on decisions they had already made. His colleagues needed his energy at every meeting. His social feed needed his attention every 12 minutes, because apparently a world of strangers had developed a deep dependency on knowing exactly what he thought about everything at all times. And he gave it. All of it. Constantly. Reflexively. Without being asked, he was generous with his attention the way drowning people are generous with water. Then one Tuesday, something strange happened. He sat down to answer a simple question. What do I actually want? And there was nothing there. Not because he was broken, not because life had been cruel, but because for so long he had outsourced every decision to the noise around him, that when the noise stopped, even briefly, he didn't recognize the silence. He had no idea what he thought, what he valued, what direction he was actually moving in. He could tell you what his boss wanted, what his friends expected, what version of himself he performed at family dinners versus the social gatherings he attended out of obligation and left feeling strangely more tired than when he arrived. But himself? His actual, unperformed, undistributed self? That person hadn't had a real conversation in years. He had been incredibly busy, going absolutely nowhere. You know this feeling. Maybe you don't call it that. Maybe you call it being responsible, supportive, mature, available, a good friend, a good partner, a good employee. You've built an identity out of being the person everyone can count on. It's a comfortable identity. People appreciate it. People depend on it. And somewhere along the way you stopped noticing that the price of being reliably available to everyone else is that you become reliably unavailable to yourself. And the troubling part is that this arrangement is rewarded. People thank you for it. It looks like generosity from the outside. It feels like virtue most of the time. Right up until the moment you ask yourself a simple question and discover that you don't have an answer. But here's what Kant would say about that. And Kant would not be gentle about it. He would say, you haven't been living your life. You've been administrating everyone else's. Immanuel Kant was born in 1724 in Königsberg, Prussia, a city so cold and grey that even the sky seemed to be minding its own business. He was not a dramatic figure. He didn't collapse under a tree. He didn't wander deserts. He didn't abandon anyone. He was, by every external measure, a quiet, unremarkable professor who never traveled more than 40 miles from his birthplace in his entire life. Let that sit for a moment. The man who restructured the whole of Western philosophy never left his city. And yet he produced a body of work so methodical, so relentlessly logical, so structurally precise, that it broke philosophy in half. Before Kant. After Kant. That's how philosophers organize time. How? Because he understood something about attention that most people never figure out. Your life goes where your attention goes, not where your intentions go, not where your wishes go, not where your carefully maintained potential goes, where your attention goes. And if your attention belongs to everyone else, so does your life. All of it. Every hour. Every year. That is the first uncomfortable thing Kant would say to you. He is only getting started. There's a word Kant used that doesn't translate cleanly into modern self-help culture. That word is autonomy. Not independence, not freedom in the casual sense, not doing whatever you want when you feel like it. Autonomy, in Kant's framework, means giving yourself your own law. It comes from the Greek. Autos, self, nomos, law. The autonomous person is not the one who does whatever they feel like. That's just impulse wearing a leather jacket and calling itself liberation. The autonomous person is the one who has decided, deliberately, consciously, from the inside, what principles will govern their behavior. And then they live according to those principles regardless of whether anyone else approves, agrees, or even notices. The opposite of autonomy is not slavery. It's something far more common and far more socially accepted. The opposite of autonomy is heteronomy. Hetero, other. Nomos, law. The heteronomous person lives according to laws given to them by external forces, by the crowd, by approval, by other people's definitions of success, urgency, and importance. They didn't choose their standards. They inherited them, absorbed them, adopted them without examination from the environment they happened to grow up in. And now they live by them so automatically that they experience them as their own values, as their personality, as just who they are. This is the most sophisticated trap Kant identified. Not the trap of being controlled by someone you can see and resent, but the trap of being controlled by expectations you have so completely internalized that you can no longer tell the difference between what you want and what you are trained to want. And here is the genuinely disturbing part. Most people are almost entirely heteronomous and have no idea. Think about how you make decisions, not the large ones, the small ones, the daily ones, the ones that accumulate quietly into the shape of your life. Do you post something because you actually think it, or because you're checking whether other people will confirm you should think it? Do you say yes to things because you want them, or because declining requires an explanation you don't feel like giving? Do you stay in situations that are slowly emptying you out? Because leaving would require a conversation you're not yet ready to have with people whose opinion you're not entirely sure you respect. And here is the harder version of the same question. When you imagine doing something purely for yourself, not for your image, not for your productivity, not as a story you'll tell later, do you feel free? Or do you feel vaguely guilty, vaguely self-indulgent, vaguely like you should be doing something more useful? That guilt is not a moral instinct. That guilt is heteronomy, doing its job, keeping you in line. If you're still listening at this point, you're the kind of person who doesn't flinch when the mirror turns around. Most people are comfortable examining everyone else's choices in detail. Their own? Much harder. The fact that you're still here means you're willing to look. Here is the distinction Kant was actually making, and why it matters more right now than it did when he was writing by candlelight in a Prussian winter. There is a difference between being busy and being directed. Busy people are in constant motion. They answer every message the moment it arrives. They attend every meeting. They show up for every crisis, every favor, every small emergency in their vicinity. They are perpetually responsive, perpetually needed. Ask them what they're building toward, and they'll give you a list of tasks. Never a direction, never a destination, never a reason beyond the next item. Directed people are different. They are not always available. They are sometimes deliberately unreachable. Not because they are irresponsible, because they are occupied with something that requires them fully. They have decided what matters, and everything else, including your urgency, is evaluated against that decision. The busy person feels important because they are needed. The directed person is building something. These are not the same thing, and the world is very good at making you feel like they are. Kant was obsessed with this distinction, not in those words, but in every structural decision he made about his own existence. He understood that the mind cannot do its best work while simultaneously managing the social demands of everyone around it. He understood that depth requires exclusion, that to go somewhere meaningful, you have to decide not to go somewhere else, that the yes and the no are, at the root, the same decision. But here's where Kant's point cuts deeper than anything in the productivity literature. He wasn't arguing for focus as a technique, not as a life hack. He was arguing for something more fundamental. He was arguing that the person who cannot direct their own attention is not fully a person in the sense that matters. They are a collection of reactions, a surface that reflects whatever light happens to be pointed at it. Impressive, in a way. Responsive, accommodating, but not the author of anything. And here is where it becomes genuinely uncomfortable. The inability to focus on yourself is not a scheduling problem, it is an identity problem. Because the real reason most people cannot sit with their own attention for more than 90 seconds is not that they love other people too much. It is that they are afraid of what they'd find if they stopped moving long enough to look. The noise isn't getting in the way of your life. For many people, the noise has become a very sophisticated, socially approved method of avoiding it. And you already know if this is true for you. Not as an idea, as a recognition. Something you felt somewhere in the last few paragraphs and immediately tried to move past. In 1785, Immanuel Kant published a small, dense, infuriating book called The Groundwork for the Metaphysics of Morals. It was not a bestseller. It was not designed to be. It was designed to be correct. Inside that book, buried under layers of technical vocabulary and sentences that read like they were translated from a slightly different dimension, was an idea so structurally clean and so psychologically radical that it has been argued about for 240 years. And it can be stated in one sentence: act only according to principles you could will to become universal laws. That's the categorical imperative. Kant's entire moral architecture rests on that sentence. But what most people miss, what the textbooks skip past in their rush to explain the abstract theory, is that this principle is as much about self-knowledge as it is about ethics. Because you cannot act according to your principles if you don't know what your principles are, and you cannot know what your principles are if you have never stopped long enough to actually think. Here is what we know about how Kant lived. Every day he walked. Same route, same time, so precise and so regular that the citizens of Königsberg, ordinary people with real schedules and real reasons to track the hour, would look out their windows and adjust their clocks when they saw him pass. His neighbors called it the philosopher's walk. He walked alone. No companion to manage. No conversation competing with whatever process was happening inside his head. Just a man, a route, and 45 minutes of uninterrupted attention every single day, without exception. When a colleague once suggested that Kant might benefit from more social engagement, more dinners, more variety of human contact, Kant reportedly looked at the man for a long moment and said something close to this: "The man who is everywhere is nowhere." He didn't say it with contempt. He said it the way you'd explain to someone that a candle burning at both ends is not twice as bright, just twice as brief. His colleague, a kind man, nodded politely and probably went to 3 dinners that week. Kant went home, wrote for 3 hours, went to bed. The Critique of Pure Reason appeared 6 years later. It remains one of the most demanding and most consequential books ever written. This is not an argument for isolation. Kant had close friends. He was, by accounts of people who knew him, a genuinely good dinner host on the rare occasions he hosted. Funny, curious, warm in the way that people who have actually thought about things tend to be warm. Not performing warmth, but offering it. But he protected his attention the way a surgeon protects their hands, not out of selfishness, because the work required it, and because he had decided the work was what he was here for. Which brings you to the question you should be sitting with right now. What is the thing that requires you? Not you available, not you when convenient, you, fully present, undivided, unhurried. Does that thing have enough of you? Be honest, let's make this concrete. Because philosophy that doesn't land in real life is, as Kant would likely agree, not actually doing its job. You are in the middle of something that matters. A project, a plan, a thought that has been building for weeks and is finally starting to have a shape. And your phone vibrates. Not an emergency, just the usual. A message, a notification, a small digital tap on the shoulder that says, "Remember that other thing." And you pick it up. Of course you do. It takes approximately 0 willpower to interrupt yourself. The device was designed to win that negotiation. Thousands of engineers worked very hard to make sure it does. But here's what Kant would want you to notice. Not about the phone, but about you. That vibration didn't force you to stop. You stopped voluntarily, without deciding to, without evaluating whether the interruption was worth the cost. You responded to the stimulus the way a reflex responds to a tap on the knee, automatically, without consulting whatever it is inside you that actually knows what matters. That is heteronomy in its most mundane form, an external signal issuing a quiet command, and you obeying it before you even had time to object. Multiply that moment by 1,000, by every distracted morning and every fractured afternoon of the last 5 years. That is where your life went. Not to anything dramatic. Just away, one vibration at a time. Now consider someone in your life who is having a problem. The problem is real. The emotion is real. But the problem is also, if you're honest, not yours to solve. You didn't create it. You cannot fix it. Your presence in it is, at best, temporary relief, and at worst, a postponement of the moment when they develop the capacity to handle it themselves. But they need you? Or you have decided from a deep and unexamined habit that they need you, because being needed is the most immediately available proof that you matter. And if you stop being needed, you might have to find a different proof, and you're not sure where to look. So you carry it, and you are good at carrying it, and you don't notice the weight until one day you sit down and nothing is there to answer you. Kant would not tell you to abandon the people you love. The point is specific. You cannot offer genuine presence to anyone if you have lost it yourself. You cannot build something worth having out of the leftover attention that remains after you've distributed the rest. An empty person, no matter how busy, is not helping anyone. They are performing helpfulness. And performing helpfulness is, in Kant's framework, not an act of will. It is a reflex dressed as a virtue, a habit that has learned to call itself generosity. The real question is not whether you help people. The real question is whether you have chosen to, from a full place, as a genuine decision, or whether you're doing it because the alternative is silence, and silence is the one place you haven't learned to be comfortable yet. So here is what Kant's philosophy looks like, translated out of 18th century Prussian German and into the actual texture of your daily life. The autonomous life, the life Kant considered the only genuinely human life, requires 3 things. It requires knowing what you value, not what sounds good, not what you're supposed to value given your background, what you specifically actually care about when no one is watching and no reward is coming. Most people have never seriously asked this question. They have answered adjacent questions and mistaken those for the real one. It requires structuring your time around that, not around availability, not around responsiveness, around what matters to you. This sounds almost insultingly obvious. The number of people who actually do it is, to be honest, very small. And it requires the willingness to disappoint people who have, consciously or unconsciously, built their expectations on your previous lack of direction. That last requirement is the one that stops most people. Because when you start focusing on yourself, actually focusing, not the kind that produces content about self-care while you remain entirely available to everyone else's emergencies, people notice, and some of them won't like it. Some will mistake your direction for neglect. Some will tell you you've changed. You have changed. That is the point. Here is the question Kant embedded in every page of his work. Are you the author of your life? Not in a motivational poster sense, in the actual sense, in the Tuesday at 3 p.m. sense. When you look at how you spend your hours, not how you intend to, but how you actually do you see a coherent person making coherent choices towards something that genuinely matters to them? Do you know what your principles are? The ones you actually live by, not the ones you mention in argument? When you make a decision, any decision, are you consulting your own judgment or triangulating based on what various people in your vicinity will think? And finally, the one that costs the most to answer honestly. When did you last do something entirely, uncomplicatedly, unapologetically for yourself? Not for your health, which you can justify. Not for your productivity, which makes you more useful to others. For you, because you wanted to. Because your own interior life deserves, occasionally, to be the thing you're actually attending to. Kant spent 40 years writing at the same desk, walking the same path, sleeping at the same hour, protecting the same silence that made everything else possible. He didn't live this way because he was rigid. He lived this way because he had decided what he was building. And once you decide that, not as an aspiration, but as a law you give yourself and then actually live by, the decisions that used to feel impossible become, if not easy, at least clear. He called it duty. Not duty to an authority above him, not duty to the city that set its clocks by his walk. Duty to the law he had given himself, the only law, he believed, that a genuinely free person can fully respect without feeling diminished by it. The person who changes their life is always the person who first changed the direction of their attention. That decision is available to you today, not by disappearing, not by becoming someone who ignores everyone and retreats into private philosophy, by asking once, seriously, in the silence that follows, what am I actually building? And then the second question, the one that costs more, does my attention match that? If it does, keep going. If it doesn't, now you know exactly where to start. Not tomorrow. Not after the current wave of other people's urgencies passes. It won't pass. There is always another wave. Now, this moment of clarity is rarer than it looks. Don't let it be interrupted.